You also refer to people having difficult situations like the marriage issue. People they've gone for counseling, they've done exercise, they've done stuff like that. And you said, what if they had prayed? So what if they prayed and that situation still remains the same? Are you saying that if they had prayed, that will have changed? And are you saying that if they did not pray, maybe prayer could have changed things? So I just wanted clarity on that. So I just started thinking about a lot of things and I started to question a lot of things. So that's one of the things that have always come to my mind. Are these things unnatural courses of life? Why are we saying that? Oh, if you have done this as a Christian, and okay, as City Church, that's one question. So all that is just one question. So as City Church, are there some artists we don't sing their songs? Is there any rule, spoken or unspoken, that says once we don't agree with your theology, we don't sing their songs? Because I realize that when we say, oh, we don't agree with this theology and we're not singing their songs, we're the same kind of people that sing songs of people that are not Christians. Um, and then finally, a suggestion. So, for the past few weeks, the sound is really a lot, and it makes me have a headache. I know that Nigerians, we love a lot of hype, but I think it will also help to think that there are some people in church that maybe are not that hyped up, and there could be a balance to that. Thanks.
Thanks. I think I should just address that last one. We're sorry about that. We're sorry about that. A number, I would say over the last couple of weeks, at a servers level, leaders level, but also staff level, this issue has come up and we've tried ways to resolve them. So we are aware of it. We're currently looking into it. Part of the problems is we're in a new space which is not exclusive to us, and so sort of teething problems around that. But by God's grace, we'll resolve it very soon. We're sorry about that. We apologize to those who haven't spoken but feel the same way. Sorry about that. Thank you for me. Thank you.
Okay, so there's two questions there that are left. If we take out that third one, so Paige, I think there's a question here in front as well.
So my question is in relation to having relationships, like friendship relationships with people who probably were practicing Christianity before and moved towards more under the umbrella term of spirituality and deconstruction. I was wondering if it's possible to have like healthy working relationships with these types of people, because like for somebody like myself, my faith is a very big part of my life. And I just think that sometimes when I have conversations with people who are saying they are deconstructing their faith or whatnot, there can tend to be a bit of friction. So I'm just wondering, is it possible to still like get along with these types of people, and how can we see God working in that? Because to an extent, I'm just like, okay, it's not like as if they are unaware of the gospel or all of these things, but they just said that they are not necessarily going to um actively believe that anymore and move more towards, you know, quote and unquote, a spiritual um practice or whatever. So how can I, be friends with these kind of
Thanks. So how can you relate with them? Thank you.
Just so I'm clear on that question, what kind of relationship are we talking about? Just normal, like working relationships, those kinds of relationships, or in a friendships?
Yeah.
Okay.
Voiro was Voiro.
Yeah. My question is basically this. I want to ask, in Christian wedding receptions, where the kind of songs you play really matter. Because you attend some receptions and the lyrics of the songs that are played, it's almost like there's no difference between you being in a club or being in a wedding reception. I'm not saying we should basically play only gospel music. There are some good songs out there, but I'm asking, do the lyrics of the kind of songs we portray in Christian wedding receptions actually matter?
So where do we start?
No, we're not done.
Oh, is that? No. Voero was the last person.
No, he has a question.
Voero was the last person.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought that as the questions are coming, we will be also having the answers to them. But on my way, I had asked from my own background that at this church, when does your own Sunday school start? Or is it? And I was told it is a question and answer session. So my own understanding is coming from 1, the Old Testament, 2, the New. Please, if you don't mind, I stand so that I can. From the Old Testament, we saw that God had instituted the teaching ministry and even chosen the family as the unit of expression for that ministry, even before he established the temple worship. He had already chosen the family. When he said, teach these things diligently to your children. Write it over your door frames as you walk on the street in various circumstances of this life. Bible study of the word or the law is something that we cannot do without, as if to say it must be 24/7 in order for us to survive in this devil's-filled world. That's the Old Testament injunction. And in the New, we find this in what we call the Great Commission. Matthew chapter 28, verses 18, 19, and 20. This session undergo some level of structuring so that it will not miss the overall objective, the meaning and purpose of the teaching ministry as in the mind of Christ. As he gave this to his disciples, he says, look, as I have taught you, so you should teach others by reaching out to them. So my own question is, has this ministry, this element of worship, question and answer as it is, gone through, or do we expect that it will undergo further restructuring so that it captures what is so evident in the mind of God? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do you want to quickly take that? So that we just get through that one.
Okay. I thought
No, just
Amy had a
because
question.
of time, we normally have a limit of 5 questions that we take during Q&A. I think we have more than 5 already, and we are going to try and take those other ones. But as always, we'll encourage you that if you have more questions, you can always move them to next week, or you can always send them to our online, to the various online versions that we have, so that we can keep those questions and take them next week. Just because of time, let's stick to those 5. I can't even remember some of them, but we'll try and recall them.
First, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for asking that question. We do want to be the kind of church where people who come in can ask questions, as we see in the New Testament. You know that in 1 Corinthians 14, it talks about conducting worship in such a way that if there is an inquirer, so he talks about believers who are among, he talks about non-believers, but he also talks about the category of the inquirer among you, that the person should be able to express themselves, or at least have a semblance of understanding of what is going on. And so we do appreciate you voicing your question, sir. I would say to the in sum, I think there is no, the Q&A session as we have it now has not been set in stone. So it can, at some point, it can be, you know, the leaders of the church can say, oh, let's readjust this thing from what it is presently to something else, or change the format. So yes, it can be reviewed. However, I would say, sir, that what you describe is about the teaching, both the teaching role of parents or families to children, but also the teaching ministry in the church. I would say that is a different thing from the format it takes, whether we call that Sunday school or, in some places it's discipleship class. Some people even do that at the workers level in churches. I would say that's a different thing. But I'll also go further to say that in the New Testament, what we find is that there are principles, but also descriptions of certain things that happen. So descriptions will fall into things like some of the recordings that we have in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 2, for instance, we are told that the early church had all things in common. That is a description. It's not a principle that transcends time. But there are also principles that transcend time. If you go through Acts, but all the way up until the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, we see there that there are certain things about the church that should take place. One of those is preaching or teaching ministry. The other is Colossians talks about singing and exhorting one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. 1 Timothy chapter 5, as we later see, talks about the role of the prophetic in the church. But there's also in 1 Timothy, Paul talks about giving ourselves to the public reading of the scriptures. And so we have some things that are principles. I would say that each church is mandated by the Bible to observe the principles of public and corporate worship. But each church has a liberty in terms of how those principles are then expressed. And so for us, because of the kind of context in which we find ourselves, the kind of people who come to this church, and other things, where a lot of the teaching ministry of the church takes place, the public teaching ministry of the church takes place on a Sunday like this, where we've gathered, where there's a sermon, but it's also in things like our gospel communities, our smaller groups. That's where a lot of this takes place, so that we actually have, sometimes it's prayer meetings, sometimes we read through the Bible, and there's a Bible study that goes on. But then we also find that for children, the Bible instructs us, as you've rightly said, to admonish them in the way of the Lord. But that means that it has to be done in a manner that they can comprehend and understand. And so we have a children's class. You see, all of this is taking what are the principles that the Bible has given us, but then trying to discern how best to work them out in time. And so when it comes to the Q&A here, the Q&A is acknowledging that first we have people who have questions about the scripture or maybe about the sermon that they've heard, but also questions about Christianity, because we find a lot of people coming to the question that you had about deconstructing. A lot of the people deconstruct or turn away from the Christian faith because they didn't have any avenues to ask the question. And so this is primarily, those three things is primarily what this Q&A time is intended to serve. Questions about the sermon, questions about City Church, like you've expressed, but also questions about the Christian faith. And so, yes, there may come a time when we say, oh, let's tweak, some aspects of the Q&A. But primarily, what we want to do at this time is to answer some of the questions that may come from any of those three things. But the teaching ministry of the church continues in all these other avenues that I've mentioned. But parents also have a responsibility to train their own children in the way of the Lord. And that's where I will leave it.
Let me extend that to just say a little bit more about what other avenues that City Church has for us to actually extend that teaching ministry that Emmanuel has just talked about. So he's already talked about one, which is our gospel communities. And gospel communities are much smaller groups where we do life together. And it goes beyond just teaching, because we want this teaching to actually go into the lives of people and affect our lives in a very real way. And it's more effective to do that in those smaller communities. But we also have what we call theology, our theology days. These are more, they're less frequent in the whole year. And we tend to do them probably about 3 or 4 a year, if I'm not mistaken. And there we do it more publicly, that is, people gather. But we are now looking at delving deeper into God's word and trying to break down theological topics that we find inside the Bible. And, we have that as well. Then he also mentioned our City Kids ministry. And in City Kids ministry, it's really a ministry for kids, but it extends because what they do in City Kids ministries as well is to equip parents to be able to follow up on some of the things that they are teaching kids so that they can continue with that at home as well, so that parents can help continue to teach their kids. So these are some of the things that, that extend. So Emmanuel is right. Because of some of these other things that we do in other avenues, this Q&A is a separate kind of thing that we do as well that just serves to answer people's questions that people will have right after we have a service like this.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I can come back to the sermon one. Maybe you can take anyone.
Okay, so your first question was about the, remind me, the sermon. Your second question was about
Music. Are there?
Oh, this, yeah. So the music, songs that we don't sing, and maybe I'll tie it to Voero's question as well. So I think you're asking about if there are certain songs that we don't agree with theologically, that we don't agree with them, but we still sing, even though they may not be theological. Can you just repeat your question again? Yeah, go ahead.
Theology.
Okay, we don't agree with their theology, yeah?
Also listen to songs that are non-Christian.
Okay, understood. So I would say there is a distinction to be made between music that we listen to in our personal lives and music that we sing corporately together when we worship God together. There is a distinction to be made there. And I do think that when we talk about songs that we sing when we are in church service, you can call them unwritten rules, but they are not unwritten rules themselves. But I would say that there are things that are born by the fact that we are gathering together, and what we want to really encourage is corporate worship. And we are trying to encourage corporate worship under the fact that we are worshiping God because of the gospel of Jesus Christ that we believe. So yes, there is clear distinction on the basis of what we actually sing. So the words that we sing, what we are actually doing when we come together in corporate worship, what the words that we actually say. So there is one clear demarcation that we can do on the basis of the words that we say. There are some artists that may be maybe based on certain things that we know about the artists. We may not necessarily agree with their general theology, but then they can come up with a song that the song itself is theologically correct. And I want to believe that there are songs that we sing that already fall into that kind of category. And then you come to the next category, which I think is partly your question, which is songs that people sing that we don't sing in church because we disagree with theologically. Now we're looking at the songs themselves, but that you have individual people who in their own personal lives listen to those kinds of songs. And, as much as we would like to advocate that we all be careful with what we listen to, so listening to songs that are more edifying. Emmanuel talked today about us singing. I mean, that is a practice that we would always encourage people to do. But at the same time, we would also encourage the fact that you should want to listen to the words of what you are singing, and it should agree with what you believe about the gospel, right? So I think the answer to that is that there is a distinction to be made about when we gather together and being able to do corporate worship, and the requirements for that being different from when people listen to songs individually. Does that help a little bit? Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. There are certain songs. Well, on the basis of what the song is, not on the basis of the life of the person. Yes.
Let me answer. So I'll answer the first question. I'll answer Fumi's question about the sermon. Then Francis will answer Ayobami's question about the age of the earth. So you wanted to answer Voro's question?
Yes. Voro, your question about wedding receptions. Now that's it's funny because I'm not sure if City Church has really been a part of any wedding reception per se. In a sense, it falls under the same category of people, individual people, and what they listen to, right? It falls under that category. And the fact that people play certain kinds of songs, the same caution that I would raise about you being a Christian and you being careful about what you listen to extends to those kinds of situations as well, right? And I would say that as much as you're right, it's not like you say, oh, when it comes to wedding reception, the only song you want to play is the same songs that you play when you are in a Sunday worship service. At the same time, you want to be careful that you are not doing anything that is contrary to what you believe in the gospel. You're not singing songs that are contrary to what you believe in the gospel. And if that's where your question is leaning, then I would say you're absolutely right in that sort of regard. That every time we are involved with music, whether it is us singing the songs or listening to the songs, or whether it is us playing the songs or choosing the songs to be played at an event, we want to be careful that we are not doing anything or choosing any songs or singing any songs that is contrary to what we believe in the gospel.
I will just add, I don't disagree with Francis at all. I will just add that on the, so that's the, if you like, the 30,000 feet, sort of answer to the question. But I think on the ground level, there are some things that make it a little bit more complex. Here's what I mean. Your DJ, for instance, if you like, tell your DJ, unless you like your DJ is Tomiwa, and you've told him, I only want songs from Hillsong. Your DJs have a mind of their own. We did our wedding reception. We told the DJ, this is what you should play. Like, these are the kind of songs we want. The guy still went and played something else. So there are different factors that sort of come into that. And I think sometimes maybe just knowing these factors helps us to be gracious to people who are doing their stuff. So like, there's the DJ has a mind of his own issue. There is sometimes, when you're involved in weddings, there are all sorts of other people involved in the planning as well. And maybe your parents or your family members who are paying for the event have told you, this is the kind of thing we want. Do you get? So again, it makes it complex. I would say that where it's, Pastor Femi has talked about different kinds of music. He's talked about Christian music, non-Christian music, then there's anti-Christian music. I would say that when it comes to Christian music, everybody is definitely amen. Non-Christian music that is still, that is not opposed to the message of the gospel or Christianity, I think we should have some sort of charity and liberty when it comes to that. But anti-Christian music, as much as we can, we should stay away from. And so I remember on that particular day, because we were the ones that hired the DJ, we didn't dance. Like, it was funny. We were dancing. It was me, actually. It was me. We were dancing. And then the guy started playing. I just stopped. And I told my best man, or the guy who was my best man, because I didn't really have a best man. But the guy who was sort of my desperate, I told him, tell him to change the song. And we were able to get him to change it. So I would say that, those sort of complexities come to play when not even just this. Think about any kind of ceremonies as well. So your first question, it's a hard thing. And so your first question is, how do you have a working relationship, friendship with people who are no longer Christians? They have publicly said so to you and to other people, and they are sort of deconstructing their faith. So deconstructing is this catch-all term. Hello, little niece. Can you go back to your seat? Deconstruction is this sort of catch-all term for people who are in the process of disagreeing with certain positions in Christianity. Now, I would say, as some people have said, that we should all be deconstructing. That means that there are things that we may have been taught from our backgrounds that are not actually in step with the truth of the gospel, like Paul says to Peter in Galatians 2, and says, guy, you are hypocritical. This thing that you're doing is wrong. And so Peter needed to deconstruct what he was doing, right? So there are aspects of what we've sort of inherited in Christianity that we should deconstruct. But there are some things that to deconstruct them is to say effectively, I no longer believe in the gospel. And here's the truth. While it is wrong as a whole to sort of, deconstruct in those essentials, there are many things that sort of lead people down that path. And so I would say that the first sort of response should be one of just charity and generosity to the people. As much as you can, don't break your relationship with them. Here's why. The whole point of the deconstruction is to say that Christians are fake. Christians believe in something that isn't true. Guess what? By you staying away from them, you are actually authenticating that. You are saying you are no longer valuable to me because you no longer believe the things that I do. And that is wrong. That's against the spirit of the gospel, right? Jesus comes to us even when we weren't believing in him, when we were his enemies. And so I would say, as much as possible, try not to break fellowship with them. But I would say to go a step further and then understand why. Again, just as there are different kinds of deconstruction, there are also different reasons why people sort of deconstruct. I think the major reason is that people have heard things or learned things about the Christian faith that as they've grown older just turns out to be false. Either false because of what they were taught wrongly or false on the basis of the lifestyle of the people who taught them. And so a lot of people deconstruct because they see, my dad, who was a preacher, I was telling everybody to be this, to be that. In his private closet, he was this sort of terrible human being. And so if he is that, then it means that this whole thing is a ruse, is false, right? And so you want to sort of hang around them, understand why, and walk with them patiently through the issue. But I'll also say that as you've acknowledged that your faith is very personal and is a big part of our identity as Christians. And so that means that particularly if the person is very vehement, you might not enjoy the same level of friendship as you were enjoying before. And I think that's something to mourn, but it's also something to just recognize this has happened and sort of move along, right? So I would say stay in the relationship, stay in the friendship as much as possible. Try to love on them, try to pray for them, try to listen to them, like why are you thinking this way? What are some of the issues? Don't step out by sending FAQs to them, even though that would be great, right? Just don't begin by sending FAQs to them. Try to understand what the issues are, and then prayerfully see where all the opportunities God might give you to sort of stay with them. But if it comes to the point where this person is so vehement, so I'm going to tear you down and tell that everything you believe, then it might be wise to sort of just give a gap. Or otherwise, you keep the relationship for as long as possible because we need them, right? We need them to see the places in our lives where there's hypocrisy, where we actually need to deconstruct and live in step with the gospel. That's what I would say. In terms of Fumi's question, it's a good question, but it's also everything is just complex today. It's also a complex question, right? Because Fumi's question also comes from the sermon. So she's both last week and this week. And so your question was, how do we, so bad things, I said last week that one of the ways in which God proves our faith is by bringing trials and suffering along our path. But that also happens to non-Christians, right? So what's the purpose of the suffering of a non-Christian? What's the end? But also that I then gave personal instances and some of the things that God saved me from. This is where I forget what you said. Please remind me. Yes, but you then made a point with that. There was a question that you had tied to that. So it was sort of like two questions in one.
Yeah, what does suffering do for non-Christians? And is it not a natural course of life? Because whether you're a Christian or not,
Yeah.
do you get that?
Yes. Great. Okay, thanks. So I would say yes, like the day Adam and Eve ate the apple, no, it wasn't the apple. But the day they ate the forbidden fruit, right? I think it's an apple actually, because apples are red. There's the juice that flows out that is not really, it's not in the Bible. That's just me. Right? But from the day Adam and Eve disobeyed God, all of human existence has faced suffering. That was the whole point of the curse. God speaks to Adam and says that you will toil in sweat. He speaks to Eve. He speaks to the ground. He speaks to the serpent. And so by being human, we will experience adversity, trials, and suffering. Where that is different, and so when Christ saves us, he doesn't save us from all of the effects of that. Some of it will be fulfilled in the new heavens and the new earth. We no longer have broken bodies. no longer get tired, no longer die, all of those things. So when Christ saves us, he doesn't save us from all of that. He still keeps us on the earth. The difference between going through that as a Christian and going through that as a non-Christian is the purpose that it's at work in that. So God's design in that is to make us more like his children, is to make us more like Christ, is to mold us and to shape us. But that purpose is not being fulfilled in those who don't follow Christ because they are not his, right? But again, God's purpose in that non-believers experience is also that somehow through the adversity that they experience, their eyes might be opened and they might turn to him. You see, one is to sort of lead them through the gates. The other is those they're already in, but is leading them further along the path of becoming like Christ and being his. So here's the thing. I think Christians have to be very careful about how sometimes we say, this thing, being too quickly to name a particular situation as from God, but also being too quick to sort of say it's the normal course of life. And that's why I say it's complex, because here's where we need the power of the Holy Spirit, but we also need God's people, right? Paul in 1 Thessalonians very clearly tells us that it was the devil that blocked his way. But like I said last week, there were other things that happened to his life that he doesn't say was the devil. It was a natural course of living in a fallen world. So we may not always know. Sometimes the Lord gives us, prophetic descriptions that makes us see. Some other times he doesn't. Our role, however, is to be prayerful and then to constantly try, in company with God's people, to discern what might the Lord be saying about this particular situation per time. But ultimately, God is always working in all of those situations to make us more like Jesus and to grow us. Thanks.
Okay, so Vora's question, sorry, I said Vora. Ayobami's question is it biblically and theologically necessary for Christians to believe in Adam as a historical person who fathered the entire human race? Then is it okay for a Christian to believe in an older earth? So right off the bat, I'll tell you, I don't have any comprehensive answer to these questions. I have what I think, and I'm very, very comfortable not knowing the answer to this question, because many people before me who are brighter than me, who are more intelligent than me, and in ages past are still debating it. Not that they've tried to answer, they are still debating it till today. So I'm okay with where I am not knowing the right answer. But there are some things that I can say, I think, about this question. First of all, I think the two questions, even though Ayobami seems to have put them together, may not necessarily be like intricately connected. The fact that whether or not you believe in a historical Adam and whether or not you believe in an older earth. So the older earth terminology, if I can explain it a little bit in my limited knowledge, is basically looking at the history of the earth, the age of the earth, and saying that the earth is older than if you were to just count the number of years that you can see in the Bible. That the earth is, as maybe science will show, perhaps even much longer than that, right? So that's just the whole concept of the older earth thing. But let me see if I can say some things about the first part of the question, about believing in whether Adam is a historical person. I think, personally, that when we read the Bible, that there is enough for me to say yes, that there's a way we can look at Adam as a historical person. First of all, just looking at the Genesis account, the dialogue that happened between God and Adam and all of that, it looks like he was talking to a person. But then if you look at other parts of the Bible as well, even Jesus Christ refers to them as though he were referring to historical people. Paul in his letter in 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians, he also refers to, if there's one, he says, if in Adam all have sinned, then he says in Christ, all are going to have life, and he calls Christ the last Adam. So just looking at some of those kinds of scriptures, I would say that, I would lean towards the fact that Adam was a historical person. But I do think that there is a discussion, a different part of the second part of the question is talking about the older earth is perhaps the more confusing part for me. And I will frame the second part of the question in the same way that Ayobami framed it. Is it necessary for one to believe in an older earth, and does that necessarily take anything away from the gospel? And I would say no, right? This is me copying out, by the way. But I would say no, it's not necessary to believe in an older earth or not, as though it will take anything away from the gospel, even though there's a way I'm leaning towards, because I believe that the point of what the Bible actually presents is that when the world was created and mankind was created, Adam, as the father of mankind, caused mankind to fall. And that on the basis of that, there was a need for God to rescue his people through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Now, whether you believe in an old earth or not, it doesn't take away from that story. And it doesn't take away from the fact that God has chosen to use the gospel or the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ to bring his people to himself. So that is the answer that I will give you. If Emmanuel wants to add anything to that to that question, I will leave him to do that.
No. I think you've answered it very well. I think we have to be careful. Both Christians in the past and Christians presently, there are the things that are essential to our faith. Jesus Christ died and rose. Jesus Christ was conceived by a virgin. Jesus Christ atoned for our sins. Jesus Christ will return again. Those things and the like, they are essential. Like, to debate that is to say, I don't believe in the gospel. But then whether, Adam was one of many, whether the earth is young or old, who they came marry, all of those kind of questions, they are not essential to our faith. And so we must be charitable in how we both disagree with other people, but mandate other people to believe our beliefs on those things. And so I hope that is very clarifying for you, Ayobami, but I hope for those in the hall as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Have a great week.